There's all this talk about NVIDIA's new CPU coming out, the N1X, a 20-core ARM-based CPU that is supposed to just disrupt the whole industry when it comes to gaming and take on the duopoly, such a fun word, duopoly. It's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly, because anyway, Intel and AMD CPUs. But did you know that NVIDIA has already tried this a while ago? They tried to acquire ARM and things didn't quite go so well. So today we're gonna talk about the rumors of the N1X, what it potentially means for the industry, and take a little bit of a history lesson on how far NVIDIA has actually been trying to move into the CPU industry, but how it kind of keeps getting blocked along the way. Today's video is brought to you by our brand new GPU Apocalypse 2.0 shirt, kind of immortalizing all of the stuff you love about today's GPUs. Our GPU Apocalypse 1.0 shirt was actually one of our most famous and popular shirts, and now it's re-immortalized with GPU 2.0. But let's face it, the Apocalypse never went anywhere, it just evolved. Just like this shirt. Go buy it now. We're gonna go way back for a minute, back to like 2011. When NVIDIA and Intel, there was a potential merger. Apparently that deal went very, very south, and Jensen at that point made it like a life's mission to take on Intel and beat them at their own game, which is obviously CPUs, x86 platform, yada, yada, yada. Or architecture, I guess we should call it. Obviously along the way, NVIDIA got a little sidetracked with AI. But let's roll back to 2020. And the reason why we're going back is you have to understand the past to really understand the future when it comes to the potential of these CPUs and what it means to the industry and the market. So in 2020, NVIDIA tried to buy ARM for $40 million. Now ARM is owned by SoftBank. So SoftBank owned ARM and NVIDIA said, hey, ARM is a very amazing platform. It's not limited to just the x86 architecture. In fact, it's very scalable. Just about every single microprocessor in any sort of electronic is running some sort of ARM-based architecture. In fact, ARM and SoftBank had their hands in every single pot you could imagine when it comes to small electronics. Now, it didn't actually work out very well for them because in 2022, the deal fell through. Because basically every single regulatory body in the world, we're talking the US, we're talking the EU, we're talking even China, said, no, this is not okay. And the reason for that is ARM has their hands, like I said, in basically everything. You have a very hard time naming an industry that ARM processors are not present in some way. So a single purchase of a company that's as neutral as ARM suddenly gives one company a lot of power. So every single regulatory body said, nope, this deal is blocked. So what happened is NVIDIA ended up paying ARM a breakup fee, because basically what happens is if you start to acquire a company and you put it in you put all the legal framework together, you start the lawyers, you get everything moving, and obviously this was a 2-year process to get to the point of the breakup. There's a lot that can happen. There could be valuation changes in the company. There could be suddenly a whole bunch of new influx of investors saying, hey, NVIDIA's bringing that in NVIDIA magic, or whatever you want to call it, over to the company. We're going to be so rich, start buying up stocks. And then when it falls apart, it doesn't happen, there could be a sudden exodus of investors. Now, there's a breakup fee associated with this particular deal that went south of $1.25 billion. But more importantly, not only did NVIDIA pay ARM $1.25 billion, they retained 20 years worth of licensing to use ARM-based architectures in their future CPUs. So that's why we had to kind of take a little bit of a history lesson to understand what this means for the future. Now, one of the biggest fears too also about NVIDIA acquiring ARM was going to be the fact that there would have been a sudden stifling of innovation, a sudden stifling of forward progress when it comes to the technology. The regulatory commissions look at this and say, hey, what does this mean for the world? Is it a good thing? Is it going to promote forward progress? Or is it going to suddenly give rise to Lex Luthor, or in this instance, Jensen Luthor? And is it going to now cause a monopoly, which in this instance it very much would, and would it slow down progress? And obviously that's the way that they ruled in this, which is why it all went down the way that it did. So there's actually 17 years left in that license agreement, that 20-year license agreement that NVIDIA got in 2022. I believe it started in 22. I don't think it started in 2020 when the deal started. I think it happened at the breakup fee, and that was part of what they got for the fee was the licensing agreement for 20 years. But NVIDIA has actually been making CPUs all along. It's just they're not in use cases you guys are probably very familiar with. In fact, they currently have the Grace CPU, which is a 72-core ARM CPU for data centers. Now, what NVIDIA has been doing is pairing the Grace CPUs with their GPUs, and they're calling it Grace Hopper Superchip. And that is actually how their giant AI manufacturing, I'm calling it AI manufacturing because they're manufacturing AI at this point. These massive data centers that are doing all of the AI processing are being done on ARM right now. Now, ARM is obviously not the one doing the calculations, it's the GPUs that are doing it, but it is an ecosystem that has been created by NVIDIA to utilize ARM and pair it with their GPUs to make it the most efficient, not just in power usage, because efficiency in AI data farms they're kind of like an oxymoron, but in terms of how well the architecture works together. Because one of the things that we're kind of lacking right now when it comes to CPUs and GPUs is a true ecosystem. The closest we've seen, to be honest, is AMD's old APUs and discrete GPUs when you were able to actually crossfire some APUs with some lower end GPUs. And it was an asymmetrical type of crossfire, meaning the CPU's APU only took up so much of the load and the rest went on to the GPU. But having any load lifted from the GPU was actually a good thing. Now, it never actually went anywhere, never went into large scale where you could have a true pairing of AMD GPU and CPU and get some sort of major uplift because of an ecosystem that exists. It never really went that way. And that's one of the things that NVIDIA really wants to do with the N1X. And that's obviously evident with the way they've implemented that in their data centers. But the types of CPUs that they're made now are just specifically, like I said, for AI data center, scientific computing, cloud services, AWS, Azure, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, heck, even Microsoft is one of the clients for this type of ecosystem. Now let's talk about the N1X CPU, because until these rumors, which are fairly confirmed without an official announcement, because we're in the second half of 2025, and that is the rumored launch of the N1X CPU, late 2025, potentially early 2026. That'll be here before we know it. It's NVIDIA's first consumer-based CPU. And I might accidentally say GPU a couple of times in this, so forgive me if I do. I'm not used to saying NVIDIA CPU. But considering nearly 15 years ago, with the way things went down with NVIDIA and Intel, I shouldn't be surprised that this is actually coming. So anyway, the rumored specs, based on the ARM architecture, it's a 20-core CPU. Have no idea if there's going to be any sort of multi-threading with that type of architecture. AI-enhanced features, no surprise, I've already created those features. Tight GPU integration with RTX synergy. So it'd be one of those things where, like I said, you have a CPU and a GPU that are able to work together to uplift the task at hand, rather than one waiting on the other and vice versa. Rather than it being two separate systems, apparently, they're gonna work together as a singular ecosystem to boost performance when paired together. It's rumored to be on PCIe 5.0 and DDR5. So that's another reason why I think, obviously, we're gonna be seeing this in the near future here. DDR5's been around for a few years now. We're still probably a few years away from DDR6. PCIe 5.0 just now are GPUs even 5.0, so I don't see this like waiting for PCIe 6 or anything like that. But it's obviously intended to drive a stake right through the heart of Core 9s, i9s, R9s, Ryzen CPUs, Intel obviously. Core Ultra, probably not too much of a concern here because people aren't really adopting Core Ultra for gaming, but obviously that target is going to be AMD CPUs because AMD's AM5 and AM4 Ryzen-based systems have been so dominant when it comes to gaming. I think that's the true target. Intel has been so quiet and their Core Ultra series was such a flop for gamers at launch. Until we see that architecture sort of improve and uplift the gaming performance, I don't think that's going to be a real player that NVIDIA is even too worried about trying to surpass. Pricing though, if we're looking at targeting i9, Core 9, and Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9, the rumors are between $600 to $900. Now, there's only one SKU so far that's rumored, and that's the 20 core. I have no doubt they're gonna scale this, but they're probably, just like they launched GPUs, are gonna start at the high end, just like they started 5090, 5080, 5070, They're gonna start at the high end and then work down to the smaller CPUs, because who is guaranteed to spend the most? The bleeding edge adopters, the hardcore enthusiasts, the I don't care what it costs, I want the latest. Those people, like me, are willing to throw stupid amounts of money at things because they're enthusiasts. And then we justify it later in stupid internet arguments as to why we did what we did, because we take it very personal when people don't agree with us. So let's talk about some pros and cons. So let's talk about some pros and cons here real quick. 20 cores is great. I assume they're gonna be pretty efficient. ARM is pretty efficient. That's one of the great things about ARM and why it's used so widely is its performance to watt is really, really good. It scales well too if you grow the silicon and the die to a large chip, like we've already seen with the data center stuff. And it scales down really well to small chiplets when we're talking about small electronics like phones and microwaves and crap like that. But so 20 core to start, which would be great for gamers, anyone wanting to do live streaming and gaming, encoding, video editing, all that sort of stuff. AI powered features obviously would integrate very well with DLSS and tensor cores and other AI features built into GPUs. The CPU AI features would obviously only uplift that type of performance. And I'm not talking about silly image generation. I'm not talking about any sort of neural processing stuff. I'm talking about features that are starting to make their way into games when it comes to AI. So if you can have AI start to utilize in single player games, maybe an adaptive or dynamic type of enemy that can learn based off of your behavior, and the game is constantly changing, and so is the difficulty level, that's awesome. That's the type of AI features I think is really cool. Like silly image generation and all that's really fun. Asking Grok to roast me usually leads to a lot of fun. If you guys have X, go to Grok and just say, hey Grok, roast Jay's 2 cents and be very mean about it. It's hilarious, and they're actually pretty damn spot on. But be fair, do it to Steve, do it to Linus, do it to Kyle, do it to Paul, do it to everybody, because they know, they're watching. They got me pegged, I tell you what. Anyway, moving on. Low power draw, which I've already said. NVIDIA's ecosystem, CPU and GPU, could obviously be something great for gamers. I know I've just used the word great and NVIDIA in the same sentence, but don't worry, we haven't gotten to the cons section yet, so hear me out, okay? The ecosystem could work out very, very well. Look at how much games benefited by just turning on resizable bar. And that's like the simplest way of ecosysteming your CPU and system memory with gaming and GPU. That's like the crust layer of what's possible. Now imagine if your CPU could actually do more integrating directly with your GPU rather than just processing the frames, right? So anyway, cons. Compatibility issues. We have been on x86 for decades. Windows is based on x86. Developers would have to also start developing and or recompiling software and games and engines to run on ARM. The only other way that could possibly work would be through emulation, and that is not gonna go well for gamers because emulation is gonna add quite a bit of lag and latency between the base architecture and the final architecture that is doing the final processing, or in this instance, the CPU. So emulation is not the way to go with this. You would need a new ground up duopoly now of architectures. You would have to have Windows x86 based architecture to be able to work with older based stuff. And I say older based, anything not NVIDIA, or you'd have to have an ARM based Windows install to work with NVIDIA based ARM CPUs. But that's not the first time we've seen this. You guys remember when we had to choose 32-bit or 64-bit Windows installs? That's still all one single architecture. It's just it's not quite as nuanced as moving from x86 to ARM. But the point is now you have a fork in the road where you're not gonna have all architectures or Windows installs and software and games all based on the same architecture. So that is gonna be one of the things that makes this a slow burn when it comes to the type of adoption that you could possibly see, not just from end users like you, because you guys will have to make a decision now. If you guys decide, and this comes out, I'm building an NVIDIA-based CPU system, you're gonna have some compromises you're more than likely gonna have to make in the beginning. It's gonna take years for this sort of thing to become pretty much a completely blurred line between the experiences. Like that is not gonna happen very quickly. Now, obviously, if you're gonna build the CPU, you need to have the motherboard. Now, fortunately for NVIDIA, they already have pretty good relationships. Well, okay, they have relationships. I don't know if I'd call them pretty good. If they were great, EVGA would still be making GPUs, right? I digress. You have to have the motherboards, obviously, to support it as well. There's probably gonna be very limited motherboard support, but fortunately for NVIDIA, they already have fast track communications with motherboard manufacturers, because think about how many motherboard manufacturers also make NVIDIA GPUs, right? You've got MSI, you got Asus, I wouldn't say ASRock, because ASRock's doing AMD GPUs and AMD motherboards. I don't think they're making any Intel CPUs or motherboards, but I digress. Any NVIDIA brand graphics card that also makes motherboards would be the likely partners of people that are making motherboards for the support of these new CPUs. But they're probably gonna be very expensive as well. I have no doubt they're gonna be expensive. Not only that, there's a big, giant unknown on how good are they going to be. Look at Intel, for instance. Intel, for years and years and years, has stuck to the same formula. They stuck to core with hyperthreading. Core with hyperthreading. It wasn't until 12th gen when we saw them kind of divide up the way the cores operated. So instead of trying to have a single core change its dynamic load and power draw and frequency based on what the system is demanding of it, they chose to just basically split the CPU, kind of like a la Ryzen, although they're not separate CCDs, they're all on the same die technically, they're fused next to each other, but you have your performance cores and you have your efficiency cores, and then the scheduler in Windows, which took some time to actually do it right, because when P-Core, E-Core existed in the beginning, not all games knew how to utilize that, neither did the scheduler with Windows, so sometimes games got thrown on the E-Cores, and then performance was complete trash, and it took time for that to get ironed out. But again, that was the first time Intel really sort of deviated once they went multi-core all the way back with like the Pentium D to a fully new architecture type. And then now if you move up to Core Ultra, they got rid of hyperthreading entirely, still have P-Core, E-Core, but look at how much it declined in terms of gaming performance. In fact, the Core Ultra in almost every instance is slower in games overall than 14th gen, which has 14 pluses on the nanometer. So it's not an easy transition to something new. So when it comes to an NVIDIA-based CPU, I can't imagine the early adoption experience is going to be terrific. I really can't. Because there's too many things right now that would have to be designed from the ground up to be a good experience. We're talking about not just the CPU has to be fleshed out, its behavior makes sense, and power draw and temperatures and all of that sort of stuff. The motherboard manufacturers, have you ever seen a new architecture? And when I say architecture, let's just say new family. Let's say a new family of CPUs come out where the motherboards didn't have 66 different BIOS updates in the first 3 months because of blue screens and crashing and RAM compatibility and all of that. When's the last time we saw Windows have to basically redesign itself from the ground up to work with a new set of hardware? It has been a very, very long time. In fact, it's always been based on x86. So this is gonna be an entirely new thing for Microsoft to even support these CPUs out of the box without doing emulation or other weird behind the scenes type of translation to the architecture from the software. And then on top of that, you have to have game developers now that are gonna be able to build a game that's gonna run great on x86 and ARM-based platforms. So it's going to be a bit of a bumpy road to get that all worked out. But we also can't sit here and complain about lack of innovation and lack of change, and then the moment change is kind of leaked and teased a little bit here, say, well, that's not gonna go well. Obviously, it's gonna be a painful experience. Obviously, if they come out with it, we're gonna utilize a system here and put it through all its paces. Might even make sense for us to do a whole like 30-day challenge. We switched to ARM CPUs only. How was it for us? You know, gaming, editing, creating content. So, but we gotta wait at least 6 more months for this. I have a feeling it's gonna end up being earlier 26. Then later 25, but think about it now. Of that 20-year license, several years of it already been burned up, and that's obviously in the development of the CPU. And my biggest question is gonna be, what happens after the 20-year license agreement runs out? ARM has the upper hand and the upper arm in that one. If you're NVIDIA and you've put all your eggs in a basket on an architecture you don't own, which you tried to own but didn't, what happens when that license runs out?